Resume recording. All right, now we're recording. Now we can get started. Good to go. Since we're all gardeners here, I'm going to garner a little bit of sympathy from everybody today. If you see me glancing down at my phone and making worried faces, it's because the local utility company is installing a new internet in my front yard as we speak. So I get these little phone messages showing me videos of them digging up my lawn. I'm not super excited about that. It's not a great day for my yard, but I apologize if I make funny faces grimacing at my phone. All right, now our housekeeping things. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Purdue Extension, we provide relevant and research-based educational services to Marion County residents and organizations who share our passion for building young leaders, creating strong families and healthy communities, developing profitable businesses and trusted employees, and growing a vibrant natural environment. So you can see some of our program areas that we do offer through Purdue Extension Marion County there. We are committed to reaching traditionally underserved communities. And these are some of the methods we are doing this by increasing our program area outreach and partnerships with Black and Brown communities, ensuring representation and full participation of diverse voices and perspectives on all extension boards and communities or in committees, and instituting a kind and trusting culture in our office through the words that we say, the actions we take, and the goals that we set. So today's topic, again, we are talking about seed starting. So when we talk about propagating plants, this is typically done in one of two methods. We have sexual propagation. This is through seed, which is what we're talking about today. And this is the combination of genetics of the two parents. And then there's also asexual propagation, which is vegetative. So this is where we are making clones of the original plant. So again, we're talking about the sexual propagation today. Some advantages with sexual propagation. We are again combining the characteristics of our two original plants. This can be expensive, and it may be the only way to get this thing done. It can be less expensive, and it may be the only way to get this process done. Some disadvantages, we are going to get some variability. We are not creating clones of the original plant when we're doing sexual propagation. There will be some variegation from the traits that we may have noticed in the original plants. It can take longer to produce a mature plant. So again, we are having to start the life cycle anew. So we are going to have to go through the stages of juvenility and the life cycle of this plant in order to get our mature plant produced. And there can be some special handling considerations. So why start seeds indoors? Well, we are hoping to save time by getting our seeds started indoors. We will be starting them indoors and then transplanting them outdoors later in the life cycle. So in doing so, we can get these seeds started earlier in the year than we would be able to do outdoors. So we can take advantage of our nice warm house. We can take advantage of that time that we can gain there. And so we can start these plants larger out in the yard, more vigorous out in the yard or in the garden space, more quickly than we would be able to do by putting seed directly in the ground outdoors. Again, we are just getting a jump start on our season. So again, we also may be able to grow cultivars that we may not be able to find from our local nurseries and our garden centers. So I'm sure we've all been through supply chain issues. We've seen the supply issues we've been having, and we may not be able to find some of our favorite plants every year from now on. So we may have to be propagating them ourselves, and this is a method by which we can do this. All right, so we're going to move into containers and growing medium. So I will go through several of the different stages that you have to take into consideration when growing seeds indoors, and we're going to start with containers and growing medium. So for containers, you can plant seeds in any clean 2 to 3.5 inch deep container that has adequate drainage holes. You'll see clean repeated a couple times in this presentation. We do not want to carry over any disease or weed issues from one season to the next. So for that reason, we need to be sure that we are cleaning our containers that are being reused. You can use containers made of plastic, compressed peat, wood, recycled containers like the cut-off bottoms of milk jugs or plastic bottles, that kind of thing. Again, we just want to be sure that we are providing drainage. We don't want to drown any potential crop that we are trying to produce. You can also use shallow trays or flats that you can find in garden supply stores. And this is a method by which you can start large numbers of seeds of a single type of thing. And then save space in doing so. So, starting with the clay and plastic pots, these are both types that can be cleaned and reused. Again, sanitation is important. We do not want to carry over disease issues. So any plants that we are looking to transplant outdoors, we're going to have to remove from these containers. We're going to have to do this carefully so that we're minimizing any disturbance to the soil ball and not losing any root material. An advantage here is that we are potentially going to be able to sow directly into these pots and again, save ourselves a little bit of time down the road. Peat pots, made from peat or paper fibers. These can be bought individually or in bulk. You know, typically we're going to the store, we're seeing big long tubes of these things that we can utilize. They have great drainage and air movement, which means they can dry down great. This is a positive and a negative. So we should absolutely be cycling our pots. This is something I talk about a lot when I talk about watering. Cycling your plants drier is a great thing. It is very healthy for their plants. With these peat containers, you know, they can sometimes dry quicker than other materials, so we have to be cognizant of that. We might want to monitor them a little bit more than some of our plastic ones, but we just need to be aware that these peat pots can dry down quickly. A benefit to these pots is that the pot itself could potentially be planted, and this again will help you minimize any root disturbance at the time of planting. Now, on the topic of planting pots, it is worth saying that no, not all pots are plantable. So if you are growing plants in your clay and plastic pots, you will have to remove them before planting. This might seem a little silly to mention to some people, but it bears saying because there is confusion sometimes. So going back to those peat pots or the peat pellets, again, you can plant these things intact. It may be worth breaking off the base of the peat pot. This could help improve root penetration into the surrounding soil and get those roots into the surrounding soil a little bit more quickly. And then we also want to make sure that the top edges of the pot are completely covered or removed at the time of planting, because we don't want these to serve as a wick and then remove any moisture from that root ball that we put into the soil. So we don't want to provide a method by which we could very quickly lose any moisture we had in that pot. So covers or domes, it is beneficial during the process of germination to keep the soil moisture and humidity up. We can achieve this by using these domes that fit directly over the trays. This is a common thing. We could also use a plastic bag. We could set that container into a plastic bag and seal that up and again, keep the humidity up. Or we could use like a cling film or a plastic wrap of some kind to achieve the same thing. Now, again, after germination has occurred, we've got plants starting to emerge. Is when we're going to want to start removing these covers. So soils, mediums. We are going to prefer a soilless mixture or an artificial media, you might hear it called that. These soils are loose, they're well drained, they're fine texture. This is all to aid with drainage. Again, we do not want to keep things in a pot or a sowing tray just swampy wet. We do need to have drainage. These are mixes that we can buy pre-prepared, or these are mixes that we can make ourselves. So they typically contain peat moss, perlite, vermiculite, these kinds of materials in various quantities. We're not recommending that you use garden soils in a container for a number of reasons. We don't want to bring in any weed seed. We don't want to bring in any disease pathogens. They also have the tendency to compact in containers, making drainage difficult, if not impossible. And they can form a crust over their surface, which can make the emergence of the seeds that we are trying to grow difficult. If we're talking about seeds, it's worth having a conversation about vermiculite. We can use vermiculite all on its own as a home for germination to occur. It is clean if it hasn't been contaminated otherwise, and typically doesn't need sterilization. You can use it in combination with other mixes. So we can have a mix of soil, we can have our seeds placed onto that, and then we can use vermiculite to cover that. It is usually available in several grades. For seeding, we want fine, and this stuff can get very fine. It can be dust. If we are amending another soil with this, we may go for the larger grades. But for our purposes, a fine grade is best. There are other options. For woody species of plants, if you have a large seed or a large acorn, for example. I do have background in the nursery industry, and what we would frequently do is just have ourselves a big gallon Ziploc baggie. We'd put a whole bunch of perlite or vermiculite in that. We'd put our acorns down in that and moisten. And then we just leave them in that bag until we notice the root radical emerging, move from bag and place into their starting container. So these mineral substitutes can just be a place where you get your germination to occur, and then take them from that germination site and put them into their on-growing container. So there's many species that we can do this with. I didn't want to get into that today because that's a whole nother conversation, but I put in there, when in doubt, research, do your reading. And that is true for anything that we're growing. Always do a little bit of reading on what you're trying to grow to determine what is the best method of doing it. All right, so moving on from soils and containers, this section is growing equipment. I will preface this section by saying that much of this is optional. These are tools to help improve your germination rates. These are tools that may help with your more stubborn varieties of things, but you don't necessarily have to have any given item in this next section. So bottom heat. We see these heat mats. I've seen these at Meijer. I've seen them at, I was just there the other day. Menards, Lowe's. They're absolutely everywhere that has any kind of garden supplies. So bottom heat heating mats can be used as a way to make our germination rates more uniform. So if we are keeping most of our seeds at a consistent 70 degrees, again, we're going to increase our success rate. We are hopefully going to have a more uniform germination of our crop. Again, like I said, available in many garden supplies. Do not use products not made for this purpose. Do not use a back heating pad. Do not use electric blankets. These things are not designed to be around the moist environment that we are going to have germinating seeds. Please always, 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 when combining electricity and water, be very careful and use products as they are meant to be used. So with bottom heat, once we have achieved germination, we no longer need bottom heat. So when we notice that around half of our seeds have sprouted, we can go ahead and remove it. And then we can move our tray underneath lights if we are doing so. We need to be cognizant that if we have too much bottom heat at sensitive stages of seedling development, we can cook our plants. Heat at the wrong time is a bad thing. So again, we're looking for about 50% of their seeds have sprouted, and then we're gonna move them off of that. Going back, I told you to do some reading. So absolutely read about what your particular species of plant likes. Grow lights. These come in a variety of shapes, forms, colors. There's many things on the market. We are trying to reduce stretching when we are using grow lights. So this is a picture of my own shelf at home. As it stood about a week ago, I can tell you everything in that tray is much bigger today. But this is just an example of a setup you can have with a shelving unit with our lights attached to the top. Sometimes we may want those seedlings to be a little closer to the light, so you have the option of either lowering your lights or raising your seeds. In my case, I have raised the seeds. I have stolen my wife's yoga blocks, and they are now a support system for my seeds. And then as my seedlings get larger, I can go ahead and lower those down. So again, they come in a variety of colors, shapes, technologies, price points. I am using some very inexpensive lights from Amazon here. So your level of investment is up to you. So when it comes to bulb technology, we're typically choosing between some kind of fluorescent light or a light emitting diode, which is what LED stands for. The fluorescence, this is the more traditional technology. This is what we think of when we think of like a shop light up on our ceiling. That's the same technology. Whereas LED lights are more energy efficient. They are hopefully going to last longer and produce less heat. I can say that my LED light setup, I can leave those suckers on for a week and then walk up and touch that bulb and have no problem doing so. There's just no heat coming off of these things whatsoever. These can be shaped like a long line of LEDs like you saw. They can be shaped like a more traditional round bulb. And again, like I said, they are becoming more affordable. They're like anything else. You can invest and get some better ones, or you can find that the less expensive ones may be sufficient for your needs. So we want to talk about the color of the light coming off of these lights. So there's a lot of science thrown at you right here. What we can distill this down to is, let's say that typically plants use more blue and blue-green light when they are seedlings and more red light later in their life cycles. So if we are only going to be using this light setup for seeds, then we are going to want to make sure that we have blue and blue-green light in our light spectrum coming off of these lights. If you think you might reuse these lights for some house plants or something more vegetative or something more mature, you need to make sure that they also have red in their light spectrum. There are lights on the market that combine these. They are multi-spectrum lights. The color of the light typically looks a little bit pinkish, purplish, but they are available. They are more multi-purpose, and you can maybe get more use out of that light across the entire year than just during your seed germination or your seed starting time of year. So yeah, like it says here, if you're just growing lights to start seeds or to grow leafy vegetables, you can stick the lights that are labeled as either blue-green spectrum or a balanced light spectrum. So when buying grow lights, more light intensity is usually better. Again, I said previously that we can adjust the location of those lights to help with this. So lights typically have a watt measurement, which is the amount of energy needed to power the light. Hopefully, if we are looking at good grow lights, they should also have a unit of intensity reported as ppf, or photosynthetic photon flux. The ppf of common grow lights ranges from 10 to 50, and for seedlings, we want to be towards the higher end of that spectrum. So, light duration, how long do we run these lights? This is really just going to be dependent on what you're growing. It's going to depend on your light. It's going to depend on the amount of photo intensity that we talked about before. So always, again, research your crop, know what system you have that you're growing with, but know that there are inexpensive timers that can be used to automate the turning on and off of your lights. This is just a traditional mechanical timer that you see here in the photo. There are digital ones if you want to get real fancy with it, but I've personally had good success with the mechanical ones. I've had no issues with them. Labels. To me, this is very important. Label what you're growing. Know what you have in that tray and don't lose track of it. So there's much information that I want to know on my label, and a lot of times that might exceed the capacity of my label. So I am going to keep an additional journal that has that information so that I don't lose it. So I might code my labels so that I know what is what, and then go to my journal and have that code that says, species, variety, days to germination, how long from germination to transplant, any additional information that I might have available to me, I'm going to try and keep that as well, so that I know typically how long I need to be, waiting before transplanting these things out. Write it down, keep it in a safe space. A pro tip is to make sure that, particularly if you have your seedlings near a window, use an ink that won't fade. There are special kinds of permanent marker Sharpies that are designed to be used in high UV environments. They're not any more expensive than your normal Sharpies, and they're on Amazon or on any other online retailer. You can find them out there. But that's another oopsie way to lose your information of what you have in any particular cell, is by going over one day and realizing, oh, I can't read that whatsoever. It's completely faded out and gone. Okay, what seed to grow? This is where I tell you exactly what you're going to grow this year. No, I'm not going to do that. But I can give you some tips on how to choose seed sources, that kind of thing. So when we talk about selecting what seed to use, we've got to talk about purity and trueness to type. So our seed source, should be a good one. We want to make sure we're not going to buy seed that has other types of seed in it or weed seeds in it. We want to make sure that we have exactly what we think we have. So we want to deal with a reliable, reputable dealer. So in Indiana, vegetable seeds must meet minimum germination standards prescribed by law. And if they fall below the legal minimum, the germination percentage must be shown on the package. So, hopefully we have the percent of germination on our seed packets. Not all seed packets have this information. I think I have that next. Yes. So not all seed packets are going to have the percent germination on it, but it is important to kind of analyze our seed packets. There's good, useful information. Remember that journal I told you about? This is where we can get some of that information. So hopefully it's going to have the name of the crop, the cultivar. If we're real lucky, we've got germination percentage, and any chemical that was used to treat that seed. Sometimes there is chemical used to treat seed, and a lot of times there isn't. There should also be a sell-by date. This will tell you basically which season this seed was packaged for. Uh, I will say that, if you're past that season, you still may have success with that seed. You may just notice a bit less germination than we may have had with fresher seed. So just because a seed has gone past that sell-by date does not mean it's entirely bad, but you may just notice a little bit less success growing it. And then if we are hanging on to our seed, we need to make sure we're storing it in a dry and cool place, and this can help raise those chances of germination in subsequent seasons. So hybrid seed. This seed is going to be a little bit more expensive than non-hybrid seed, but in return, you may get a little bit more vigor, you may get more uniformity, hopefully some larger yields, and maybe even some disease resistances. So when choosing between hybrid and non-hybrid, you kind of have to weigh in your personal case whether or not that increase in cost is worth what changes in performance you're going to notice. I wanted to include just a quick example of, well, what is a hybrid seed that I might know about? So the Big Boy hybrid, that's a famous one. All right, so we've got our setup, we've got our pots, we've got our soil, we've chosen what we're going to grow. So let's move on to growing that seed up. So temperature, most annual plants and veggies prefer a night temperature of 60 to 65 and a day temperature about 10 degrees warmer than that. If we keep them too warm, this can increase legginess. So a tip that I saw was that maybe we have a spare room that we can utilize for our seeds, and keep the temperature in that room slightly different than the rest of the house. Just an option. Moisture and watering. So good air humidity is an asset for producing good plants. So if you must, a humidifier can be used to raise the humidity in the environment you're growing them. I would encourage use of a humidifier over keeping that shell on too long. So earlier we talked about the dome that can go over our trays. That can be a good thing, but we don't want to keep the environment too moist. That can lead to the development of disease issues. We can notice our seedlings start to fall over because they're starting to rot out a little bit down at the base. So, a humidifier can be used if you have just an awfully dry environment that you're trying to grow in. And then do not overwater. Certainly, we want to be cognizant that these fresh, newly emerged seedlings do not have a lot of root material available to them, but we also need to keep that cycle of wet and dry going. So as they're newly emerged, yeah, we're probably going to keep them a little bit more moist, but as they begin to grow, as they start putting down roots, we've got to continue that cycle of dry down. That is going to encourage root growth. The asterisk being, this is always my disclaimer when I talk about letting things dry down. There is a difference between drying them down and letting them wilt. So there is a happy medium somewhere in the middle there, and we have to find it. So dry them down, don't let them actually wilt, particularly when you have seedlings, because they are very vulnerable at this stage. Spacing. So as soon as the first set of true leaves has been developed, so the first leaves that come out are the cotyledons. These are not true leaves. The next set that come out are what we're talking about here. So these are called the first set of true leaves. So once these have been developed, they are ready to be transplanted and spaced into pots or flats. If we keep them in their germination flats too long, we can have some overcrowding. And once again, this is something that can encourage some spindly seedlings that are not developing properly. So you need to be careful when moving these. You can transfer them and dig them up with a small knife, a spatula, or some other kind of tool. If you have a group of plants, you can bring a group of plants out of your flat and then very gently encourage them to separate. But we are, during this process, trying to avoid the tearing of roots. We are trying to minimize the disturbance to the root systems. So we want to plant the seedling at the exact same depth at which it was growing before. Small plants or slow growers, you can place those about 1 inch apart. If they are rapid growers, we can plant these 2 inches apart. Again, it depends on where we're putting them, whether we're putting them outdoors at this stage or if we're putting them into other trays to grow them on, or maybe we're putting them into just another pot. We want to firm the soil after planting and then water gently using a gentle breaker. A nice fine breaker is a good tool to have available to you. This is something that's not going to greatly disturb the soil in the pot when we are watering. And then we want to keep them in the shade for a few days or place them under fluorescent lights. Again, this is time of year dependent. We might be ready to move them outdoors already, but if we are not, we do want to keep them under the fluorescent lights. And then we want to continue that watering and any fertilizing that we have been doing before. We want to keep that schedule. And I will go through fertilizing here in a minute. Hey, how about now? So fertilizing. Seedlings will need fertilization for best development. So if you are growing in artificial mixes, which you should be, there's very little nutrients in those materials. So we will need to provide some supplemental fertilization, but you do need to be aware if you are using a store-bought mix, you need to be aware of any starter fertilizer that is there. So you need to know that before you do any supplemental fertilization. But a good recommendation for a fertilizer at this stage is a soluble houseplant fertilizer like 15-30-15. We need to apply that at about half strength a few days after the seedlings have germinated. And then after that, fertilize at 2-week intervals with a dilution recommended by the manufacturer. We have to be careful with seedlings and fertilizer. We need to be cognizant again that these roots are tender and that fertilizers are salts. So we can cause injury if we are over fertilizing. Oh, one of my favorite subjects, nutrient monitoring. If you've heard me talk before, you've probably heard me talk about utilizing a pH-EC meter as a tool of nutrient monitoring. I just talked about this last night in the Master Gardener training because we had the Soils Week. So I told everybody last night that, yes, this unit is a little bit expensive, but there's a lot that you can do with these things. Now, come to find out today, when somebody emailed me, I found out that, well, like everything else, prices on these things have gone up. Unfortunately, these things are now closer to 170 than they are to 120 when I bought it last year. That being said, if you have curiosity about pH and nutrition like I do, I still think this is a tool that you can use year-round, not just in seedlings. But this is a probe that you can stick into your solution so that will give you a reading of, oh, excuse me, my computer's beeping at me, that will give you a reading of EC. EC stands for electrical conductivity. So this is, EC is representative of the level of minerals, which in our case is fertilizers, in a solution. So if you have any questions about these nutrient monitoring tools, this is another one of those things that I could talk way too long about, so I won't cover it today, but feel free to reach out if you want to know more about nutrient monitoring. Great tools. There are other brands available. There are less expensive ones available. This is just one I happen to be familiar with. I'm not recommending any one brand over any other brand, but a great tool for gardeners, both in containers and out in your yard. Okay, so we have a crop. Now we want to talk about pinching it back and hardening it off. so that it is ready to be transferred outdoors. So most annual flowers respond well to pinching. So this is where we are going to go in and remove the apical meristem. This is a site that produces hormones that discourage lateral branching. So if we go in there and we remove that, we are going to encourage branching from the sides. So usually the top inch or two is removed. I encourage, depending on what size we have here, if it's really small, I might just go back to the next bud. If we have a leggier plant, yeah, you can go down 2 or 3 buds, but I do encourage that you go back to a bud and pinch it there. Vegetable plants, we're not encouraging pinching. It can be done with certain things, but that's not a recommendation that we have. Hardening off. So if we are growing plants indoors, we do not need to just throw them outside and say, we're good to go. There needs to be a transition period. So this is typically started 2 weeks before planting out into the garden. We want to set them outdoors in a cool, shady area for an increasing amount of time every day. And then we want to introduce them slowly to more sunlight, more heat over that 2 weeks. Be sure to avoid windy temperatures, like the weather we've been having recently, because we do not want to damage these supple young plants by blowing them over. And then also, obviously, we want to avoid temperatures below 45 degrees. We've worked hard on our seedlings. We don't want to make them crispy from the cold. So when the plants are large enough to handle and they're ready and they have already been hardened, they are now ready for transplant into the garden, weather permitting. We want to retain as much soil as possible when taking them out of their containers. Again, we're trying not to disturb the roots unless absolutely necessary. Just like when we transplanted before, we want to plant them into our garden at the same level as they were in their container. We're not trying to bury them, with the exception of things like marigold or tomato that can be buried if they have become leggy. And then again, a starter fertilizer of 15-30-15 can be used at this time when we are transplanting. The phosphorus there is being used to help encourage the growing of more roots. So that's why we have a high phosphorus. So I wanted to also talk about seed saving just a little bit. Kind of goes hand in hand with seed starting, similar topic. So, you may come into a situation where you have a plant that you like and that you would like to save some seed from that plant and, grow it again. So we are going to need to know a little bit about, what seed to save, how to grow seed, how to leave the plant long enough to produce seed, how to handle that seed, and how to store that seed. And this is something, can help maybe reduce the cost of your annual startup every year. You can, save a little bit of money by not buying seed. And again, a method by which we can preserve your best performing plants. So some things we should not save. So seed from hybrid plants should not be kept. This is because we are going to lose that hybridization over time. We don't want to keep things that are easily cross-pollinated, again, because we are going to lose the target plant that we are trying to grow because it's no longer going to be true to form. So things like sweet corn, squash, and pumpkins. And then bean seed may carry viruses and some other diseases from one season to the next. So we need to be cognizant of that as well. So, just like the timing of produce harvest is the crop begins to ripen, seed harvest is about proper timing as well. You may be doing this multiple times as different rotations of seed mature. It may not happen all at the same time. So this is something that could happen, over the course of 4 to 10 weeks. And you could be harvesting seed the entire time there. So some plants may go to seed with little more given time. So cilantro goes from germination to setting seed in about 100 days. Squash takes 150 days from germination to setting seeds. And some plants may need encouragement to begin their reproductive cycle. This is a method that we did use in the greenhouse. Sometimes if a plant is too fat, happy, and healthy, it's just going to be vegetative. Life is good. I don't have to worry about the next generation. Everything's great. So we would say we need to start stressing those plants a little bit, because in doing so, some species respond by saying, I've got to worry about the next generation now. It's time to be reproductive. So stressing the plants can help a otherwise vegetative crop transfer into the reproductive life cycle. But once seed has set, be sure to, again, go back to making that plant happy. All right, so we wouldn't be Extension without referring you to some good resources. Much, if not most, of the information from today's presentation came from a Purdue resource. This is HO14W. This is Seeds, Starting Seeds Indoors, a great resource that was developed by Rosie Lerner. It was updated as recently as 2020, so the information is still great. But much, again, of what I've been speaking about today has come from this resource. But there are some other things that were just too complicated to talk about in a presentation, so it is worth reviewing. So we have things like time to seed before last frost, broken down by plants. It tells you how long for germination. It even discusses things like average date of last spring frost or average date of first fall frost. So good information available in this publication. I encourage you to review it. Go broaden your knowledge a little bit more than what we covered today. Thank you. Laura has posted that in the chat for us. And with that being said, we can start tackling some of these questions I see. So let me make some modifications. Oh, let me act like I know what I'm doing here. All right, so you should now be able to unmute. Laura, if you want to walk me through some questions we have here.
Absolutely. And the first question, just reminding everyone that Carrie is recording this and he will send that out after today if you want to touch back and watch it again when you're actually doing the seeding and need to reference it. So you don't have to take notes, you'll have that. So one of the questions, we've got some comments in the chat, Carrie, so I won't kind of go over comments. I'm just going to do questions.
Okay.
So one of the questions was, can you use egg cartons for seed starts?
I have seen this done. I would probably stick to things that are pretty rapid growing, just because I wouldn't want to keep them in there very long. And then I would know that I would need to transfer out of those pretty rapidly as well. I think the material sometimes with egg cartons may not hold up quite so well to the moist environment we're doing. But if you know the limitations of the material, and again, we talked about sanitizing a lot. If you have sanitized that material well, then it should serve well enough to get you through germination and transplanted into something else.
Thank you. There was also a question about the recent weather changes. We're seeing like some really warm, unseasonal temperatures. Has our zone changed or the last frost date changed for Marion County?
So you have to know a little bit about how these maps are developed when you talk about that. So these maps are based on historical data and averages. So if you know a little bit about math, you know that averages, can be affected by outliers, but not quite as much. Always, if you're looking at these maps, make sure that you have the latest version that you can find. So again, I said this publication was updated about 3 years ago. I don't know that our zone has changed since then, but some of these average frost dates may have been updated. I guarantee you that information is readily available from Purdue Extension. That is part of what Purdue does, is provide some of these very useful gardening and farming historical data things. So absolutely, these things can change. Always worth making sure you have the most recent data. Absolutely.
Okay, and there wasn't a question, but there were some comments from one of the participants regarding peat moss and if it's supposed to be used, or there's some environmental concerns with peat moss that you might want to avoid it now. Do you know anything about that topic?
I do know a little bit about peat moss production. And this is an accurate statement saying that peat moss production is not a sustainable practice. This is why, when I was in the nursery industry, we were always looking for alternative sustainable materials. If you really want to go down that rabbit hole, I would encourage you to look at mushroom compost as a substitute. So mushroom compost is something that has been used for about the last decade or so in the nursery industry. So in nursery mixes, if we're talking about potting mixes, those mixes historically had been aged pine bark, peat, and sand. But several companies have had products on the market that have replaced that peat with, like I said, mushroom compost, or, there's some that have been experimenting with chicken litter, other sources to provide that same function within the mix. So, yes, there are things coming down the pipeline to help be more sustainable for potting mixes. A lot of that has just not quite trickled down to the home garden yet. Be patient. We're working on it.
Thank you. Another question was, can you give the proportions of the vermiculite to perlite to sphagnum moss for homemade seed starting medium? Do you have that proportion?
I do not have it readily available in front of me, but I will say, oh, I see it there. Shirley, yeah, check out that publication. So that I can almost guarantee that Rosie had that information in there. She was really good about providing recipes for homemade mixes like that. So check out that HO14W, and it's probably in there.
And then we just have a comment saying that another individual has tried with egg cartons and found that they dry out a little too fast for their preference because it's so shallow.
Yeah, again, that's why at the beginning we recommended something that was closer to 3.5 inches, just to provide that buffer. That's why I'm thinking that if you're doing egg cartons, you're really not going to be able to hang out in those things very long. You may achieve germination, but you're going to have to get out of them pretty quick, like.
I don't see any more questions, Carrie. Does anybody else have any more questions they want to drop into the chat for Carrie?
Well, I appreciate everybody coming. Hopefully you found something new for my master gardeners, and hopefully everybody has some takeaway. Has anybody started their seed yet? Is anybody as impatient as I am?
We did get another question.
Oh,
Gary,
yeah.
what is a gentle breaker? That was when you were describing like watering gently.
Yes. So a breaker is something that breaks up the flow of water. So a gentle breaker would be something with many, 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 many small holes, because the smaller those flows of water are, the weaker they're going to be when hitting the soil surface. So there are breakers available in all kinds of different hole patterns, but a gentle one is just something that's designed to break up that flow to be very super soft, that is not going to disturb your seeds or your soil when you're using that overhead. Must vermiculite be moistened when used to cover seeds? Yes, absolutely. So if you are going to cover your seed, then you must make sure that it is moistened up. So what is a breaker? So Shirley, do you know watering wands? Have you ever seen a watering wand that goes on the end of a hose, and then there's a thing at the end? The thing at the end is the breaker. That is what is turning that big flow from the water hose and softening up that flow into smaller holes, so that it's not, just Because I'm sure if you've taken a pressure hose to your soil, you're digging furrows with that. And that is what a breaker is designed to do, is to disturb that process. Can I address soften water? Tricky subject, but yes, if you have water softener, you are technically adding salts into your soil. So something you can do to kind of help counteract that is to always, if you're irrigating your seeds, or if you're irrigating your house plants or anything like that, make sure you have water coming out the bottom of that pot, because the bottom of the pot is where the salts will settle. And by flushing that, you are pushing those salts out of that pot. So if you're irrigating a container and you're not flushing it, you are allowing more salt to build, more salt to build, more salt to build, more salt to build. So you must have that flushing event every time you irrigate a container, whether it's seeds or whether it's a big old tropical plant you've got in the corner of your house. Should I add sand to my soil for watermelons? If I'm honest, I don't know that answer. I have not personally heard that, so I don't know how to address that one for you. All right, well, again, I'm going to have this recording processed, and then I will try and get that posted to our Marion County, Purdue Extension Marion County YouTube channel, so that if anybody wants to review what we've talked about today, it'll be available for you there. Otherwise, thanks everybody for coming.